They were adored on screen, praised by millions, and once seemed untouchable. But behind the fame, some British stars faced bankruptcy, illness, and lonely final years. Today, we uncover the painful truth behind the applause. Subscribe to Hollywood Legends Remembered and help keep these forgotten stories alive. Terry Thomas. The benefit gala was not arranged to celebrate Terry Thomas's comeback. It was arranged because the man who had once made Britain laugh now needed help paying for care. With his gap-toothed grin, polished accent cigarette holder, and gift for playing charming cads, Terry Thomas became one of British comedy's most recognizable faces in films like School for Scoundrels, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, and Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines. Parkinson's disease was diagnosed in 1971, and the illness slowly took away the voice movement and timing that had made him so distinctive. Work became harder. Medical costs grew, and the fortune he had earned across stage television and film faded into treatment bills and daily survival. Can you imagine being known for elegance and wit, then needing charity just to live with dignity? In 1989, friends organized a gala at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, raising enough money to move him into a nursing home in Surrey. Terry Thomas died in Godalming in 1990, aged 78, remembered not as a scandal, but as a painful reminder that fame does not protect anyone from illness. Peter Adamson. Len Fairclough's rough jacket and pint-glass charm made Peter Adamson feel like a permanent part of British television. For 22 years, he played the Coronation Street builder, whose stubbornness, romance, and working-class grit made him familiar in millions of living rooms. But the man behind Len found that a long-running role did not guarantee a safe ending. In 1983, Adamson left the show after a damaging legal and professional crisis. He was acquitted of indecent assault charges, but Granada did not renew his contract after a breach connected to newspaper memoir deals. By 1991, Adamson was declared bankrupt with debts reported around £32,000, much of it linked to legal costs from the earlier case. Acting work became rare, and the image of a national soap star gave way to a quieter life on pension and benefits in Lincolnshire. Can you imagine being recognized by millions, then discovering recognition could not pay the rent? Adamson died of stomach cancer in 2002 at 71, leaving only a small estate behind. His story was not a glamorous collapse, but a slow disappearance from the street that had once made him famous. Warren Clarke. Probate papers gave Warren Clarke's final story a number that shocked many fans, just over £13,000 in gross estate. For a man who had worked across British film and television for nearly 50 years, the figure felt almost impossible to match with the face audiences remembered. Clarke had appeared in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange as Dim, then later became best known to television viewers as Detective Superintendent Andy Dalziel in Dalziel and Pascoe, a role he played for years with blunt force dry humor and heavy presence. What happens when decades of familiar work leave behind less than the public expects? Clarke died peacefully in his sleep in 2014, aged 67 after a short illness. Reports later said his estate was far smaller than expected, and some coverage linked his financial trouble partly to money lost on the 2013 film The Numbers Station, though the full private picture was never completely public. His ending was not loud or scandalous. It was quieter than that, a respected actor, a long career, and a final sum that made people wonder where security had gone. Dennis Price. The role that made Dennis Price immortal required perfect manners, a silk voice, and a talent for murder. As Louis Mazzini in Kind Hearts and Coronets, he became one of British cinema's most elegant villains, moving through ambition and cruelty with frightening charm. Later television audiences knew him as Jeeves in The World of Wooster, where his calm precision seemed almost effortless. Behind that polished image, Price's life was far less controlled. His career had begun with privilege, good looks, and strong reviews. But by the 1960s, the work was thinner. Money trouble had deepened, and tax problems followed him. He left his Mayfair life for Sark in the Channel Islands and was declared bankrupt in 1967. What happens when an actor famous for control can no longer control the ending? Price died in Guernsey in 1973, only 58 years old. Later accounts described cirrhosis of the liver and a lonely final chapter far removed from the elegance he once carried on screen. James Robertson Justice. Sir Lancelot Spratt's booming voice could make an entire hospital corridor feel guilty. James Robertson Justice used that authority to become one of British cinema's great comic figures, especially in the Doctor film series, where his performance in Doctor in the House stood out as one of the film's most memorable parts. He also appeared in major productions such as Moby Dick, The Guns of Navarone, and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. The screen image was enormous beard, voice, temper, confidence. But after a severe stroke around the end of the 1960s, Justice's ability to work declined sharply. Further strokes left him unable to continue properly, and in 1970, he was declared bankrupt. Can you imagine watching a man who once played absolute authority lose control over his own health, work, and money? Justice died in 1975 at 68. His final years were far from the commanding presence audiences remembered, but his voice still echoes through the old British comedies that made him unforgettable. Peter Wyngarde. Velvet suits, gold cigarette holders, and a sharp mustache made Peter Wyngarde one of British television's most unmistakable faces. As Jason King in Department S and its spin-off Jason King, he turned flamboyance into a brand, part detective, part novelist, part walking 1970s fantasy. In 1970, he was even declared Britain's best-dressed male personality, a title that suited the image perfectly. But the style lasted longer than the security behind it. After his peak years, roles became less reliable, and the industry no longer knew what to do with a performer so tied to one dazzling persona. By 1982, Wyngarde had been declared bankrupt, and reports from that hearing said he was living on Social Security. How does a man remembered for luxury end up fighting ordinary bills? Wyngarde kept working in smaller parts, including Flash Gordon and Doctor Who, but Jason King remained the shadow he could never fully escape. He died in London in 2018, reported as 90, with the old glamour still attached to his name. Wilfred Hyde White. Colonel Pickering's clipped manners followed Wilfred Hyde White long after My Fair Lady. With his polished voice, raised eyebrows, and effortless air of old-world authority, he became the kind of British character actor audiences trusted instantly. He worked for decades across stage, film, and television, appearing in The Third Man, Let's Make Love, My Fair Lady, and many later American productions. But Hyde White's elegant image hid a more complicated financial life. He had a reputation as a bon viveur, and in 1979, he was declared bankrupt by the Inland Revenue. The man who so often played diplomats, officers, judges, and gentlemen had been caught by the least theatrical enemy of all unpaid money and official paperwork. Can you imagine hearing that voice and assuming security only to learn the real life behind it was far less certain? Hyde White spent his final years at the motion picture country home in Woodland Hills, California. He died there of heart failure in 1991, aged 87, leaving behind a career that still sounded richer than his private ending. Ian Hendry. Dr. David Keel was supposed to make Ian Hendry the face of the Avengers. In the first series, he received top billing above Patrick McNee, and the show began around Keel's personal revenge story before Steed gradually became the figure viewers remembered most. Hendry left after that first season and pursued film work, earning BAFTA nominations for Live Now, Pay Later, and Later Get Carter. His talent never fully disappeared, but the momentum did. Alcohol problems, unstable work, and personal strain followed him through the 1970s. He still appeared in strong films and television parts, including The Hill Repulsion, The Lotus Eaters, and The Passenger, but the leading man future once predicted for him kept slipping further away. By the late 1970s, he had been declared bankrupt. How does an actor go from being the original star of a famous series to becoming a footnote in his own legend? Hendry died in London on Christmas Eve 1984, aged 53, leaving behind one of British television's most painful what might have been stories. Tod Slaughter. Sweeney Todd's razor was the prop that kept Tod Slaughter famous. Long after Victorian melodrama had started to look old-fashioned. Born Norman Carter Slaughter, he built his reputation on blood and thunder stage roles, playing villains in Maria Martin Sweeney Todd, The Face at the Window, and other lurid stories where audiences came ready to hiss the monster and enjoy every exaggerated gesture. His screen career began in the 1930s, when cheap British thrillers turned that theatrical villainy into a cult image. But the world that sustained Slaughter began to shrink. Touring income declined in the early 1950s, public taste moved away from old melodrama, and in 1953, he was declared bankrupt. What happens to a performer when the audience still remembers the face but no longer buys the ticket? Slaughter kept working in stage productions, television, and old-fashioned entertainment. He died in Derby in 1956, aged 70, after a performance of Maria Martin. His villains survived better than his finances. Stanley Holloway. Alfred P. Doolittle's laugh carried Stanley Holloway all the way from London music halls to Broadway and Hollywood. Long before My Fair Lady, he had built a career as an actor, singer, comedian, and monologist, famous for comic songs and spoken pieces that became part of British popular entertainment. His performance as Eliza Doolittle's father became the crowning role of a career that lasted for decades across stage, screen, radio, and recordings. The financial trouble came much earlier than many viewers realize. In the late 1920s, Holloway ran into difficulty with the British tax authorities and was briefly declared bankrupt. It did not destroy him, but it cut through the idea that a beloved voice and steady work automatically meant safety. Would you expect a performer who sounded so cheerful, so permanent, to have a bankruptcy file hidden in his past? Holloway recovered and kept working into old age, even appearing at the Royal Variety performance in 1980. He died of a stroke in Littlehampton in 1982, aged 91. Max Wall. Professor Wallofsky's twisted walk made Max Wall unforgettable. Black clothes, elastic legs, sad eyes, and a body that seemed to bend comedy out of shape. Born Maxwell George Lorimer, he came from music hall, built a long career across variety, film, television, and theater, and later earned serious respect in stage roles far beyond simple slapstick. John Cleese even acknowledged Wall's influence on the famous Ministry of Silly Walks sketch. But Wall's private life carried heavy damage: 3 divorces, career setbacks, drinking problems, and shrinking work. After losing property and facing a large tax bill, he was declared bankrupt in November 1973. Around that period, reports described him living in a small bedsit, far from the earlier years when he had owned Rolls-Royces and homes. Can you imagine making audiences laugh for decades, then finding yourself trapped in one rented room with the bills still waiting? Wall later rebuilt respect through theater and screen work. He died in 1990 after a fall outside Simpsons in the Strand, aged 82. Adam Faith. The Money Channel was supposed to be Adam Faith's clever third-act pop idol actor, then financial expert. Born Terence Nellums, he had first become famous in the pre-Beatles era with UK #1 hits like What Do You Want and Poor Me, then reinvented himself on screen in Budgie and later Love Hurts. For a while, his move into financial journalism and investment advice made him look like one of the rare stars who had beaten show business by learning money's rules. Then the dot-com dream collapsed. Faith had helped launch the Money Channel in 1999, but the venture failed after only a short life. In 2002, he was declared bankrupt with losses reported as high as £32 million. Can you imagine teaching the public about money then, watching your own fortune disappear on the same stage? Faith died of a heart attack in 2003, aged 62, after falling ill following a theater performance in Stoke-on-Trent. Joan Turner. A 4.5-octave soprano voice made Joan Turner sound almost impossible to classify. She could move from opera to pop, then break the spell with a comic impression, and British audiences loved that unpredictability. Born in Belfast and raised in London, Turner became one of the country's leading entertainers in the 1950s and 1960s, topping bills at the London Palladium and appearing in the 1963 Royal Variety show. But the same wild energy that made her exciting also made her career unstable. Later reports described alcohol gambling, broken contracts, and damaged professional relationships. In 1977, she was declared bankrupt, even though that same year she still appeared in the Queen's Silver Jubilee performance. How does someone go from standing above the Beatles on a royal bill to struggling for a safe place to live? After years of decline, Turner returned from Los Angeles to Britain and spent her final years in sheltered accommodation in Surrey. She died in Banstead in 2009, aged 86. William Roach. The single word boring followed William Roach from a newspaper headline into a courtroom, then into bankruptcy. Roach had played Ken Barlow on Coronation Street since the soap's first episode in December 1960, becoming one of British television's most familiar faces and a Guinness-recognized record holder for the longest-running continuous TV role. In 1991, Roach won a libel case against The Sun after the paper claimed he was disliked by castmates and mocked him as boring Ken Barlow. But the victory came with a cruel twist. The damages matched an earlier settlement offer, leaving him responsible for heavy legal costs. Years later, after also suing his former lawyers, Roach was declared bankrupt in 1999. How can a man seen by millions every week still be trapped by bills the public never sees? Roach kept working, and Ken Barlow remained part of British culture. His case shows a different kind of financial fall, not disappearing from fame, but going broke while still standing in its spotlight. Anita Harris. The bankruptcy notice reduced Anita Harris's long career to a cold financial line. For decades, she had been known as a polished British entertainer, singer-dancer, actress, television guest, pantomime regular, and one of the memorable faces of the Carry On films. In the 1960s, she appeared in Follow That Camel and Carry On Doctor, while her recording career included chart success with songs such as Just Loving You. By 2014, the public image of elegance met a more ordinary problem. Harris was declared bankrupt over unpaid taxes, with reports saying she owed more than £14,000. There was no dramatic scandal, no wild collapse splashed across years of headlines, just the quiet machinery of debt catching up with someone who was still working. Can you imagine still walking on stage with grace while private financial trouble follows you behind the curtain? Unlike many names on this list, Harris did not disappear. She continued performing, appearing in theater, television concerts, and pantomime, proving that a bankruptcy notice could bruise a reputation without ending the act. Michael Barrymore. An inland revenue bill became the paperwork behind Michael Barrymore's public collapse. In the 1990s, he had been one of Britain's biggest light entertainment stars, fronting shows such as Strike It Lucky My Kind of People and Barrymore, with the catchphrase, "A white turning into a national greeting." His appeal came from speed noise improvisation, and a gift for making ordinary audience members feel like part of the act. Then came the 2001 death of Stuart Lubbock, who was found in the swimming pool at Barrymore's Essex home after a party. Barrymore denied wrongdoing and no charges were brought against him. But ITV did not renew his contract. Planned work disappeared, and his career never returned to its old height. How does a Saturday night favorite go from filling living rooms with laughter to watching the industry close its doors? In 2004, Barrymore filed for voluntary bankruptcy over unpaid taxes. He later made occasional returns, including Celebrity Big Brother, but the old certainty was gone. His story remains one of British television's most dramatic falls from mass popularity to public exile. Jim Davidson. Jim Davidson later admitted bankruptcy was one of the most humiliating moments of his life. For years, he had been used to walking on stage as the loudest man in the room, a comic who could control a crowd with blunt timing, confidence, and controversy. On British television, Big Break and The Generation Game made him a familiar Saturday night face, while live tours kept his name selling tickets across the country. But behind the bookings, an old tax problem was growing. In 2006, Davidson was declared bankrupt after failing to meet repayments on a back tax bill reported at around £1.4 million. He had already paid part of what he owed, but not enough to stop the order. Can you imagine still being able to fill a theater while the biggest fight of your life is happening on paper? Davidson did not vanish afterward. He kept touring, returned to television, and rebuilt parts of his career. But the bankruptcy stripped away the idea that success always means control. Tony Slattery. A single suggestion from the audience was enough for Tony Slattery to turn chaos into comedy. On Whose Line Is It Anyway? He became one of British television's quickest minds, firing out characters' jokes and sudden turns as if the whole room belonged to him. He also appeared in films such as The Crying Game, Peter's Friends, and How to Get Ahead in Advertising, carrying the restless energy of a performer who seemed impossible to slow down. But away from the cameras, Slattery's life became far more fragile. He later spoke openly about bipolar disorder, depression, alcohol and drug problems, and the damage those struggles did to his career and finances. In 2020, he revealed that he had gone bankrupt, blaming not only addiction and mental health issues, but also poor money skills and misplaced trust. Can you imagine making a whole country laugh while privately losing control of your own life? Slattery died in January 2025 after a heart attack aged 65. His final years brought honesty, renewed affection, and a reminder that comic brilliance can hide very deep pain. Christopher Trace. Model trains helped Christopher Trace get the job that made him part of British childhood. He bonded with Blue Peter's first producer, John Hunter Blair, over their shared love of railways, and in 1958 he launched the BBC children's program alongside Layla Williams. For 9 years, Trace was the calm, friendly face of a show that taught children to make things, ask questions, and see television as an adventure. After leaving Blue Peter in 1967, he tried to build a new career behind the camera. He joined a film company called Spectator as a writer and production manager, but the company failed after 2 years, costing him his life savings. In 1973, Trace was declared bankrupt. How painful must it be to help create a national institution, then lose your own safety so quietly? Trace later worked again in regional broadcasting, including BBC East's Look East, before moving into other jobs outside television. He died in London in 1992 from cancer of the esophagus, aged 59. Sidney Chaplin. The name in this chapter belongs to Sidney John Chaplin, Charlie Chaplin's elder half-brother, not Charlie's son. Sidney had protected Charlie since their London workhouse childhood, then helped him professionally as a performer negotiator and business manager. Charlie's official site notes that he credited Sidney for much of his professional and financial success. Sidney was not only Charlie's brother. He had his own stage and screen career, worked with Fred Karno, joined Keystone, starred in comedies, and later appeared in films such as The Better 'Ole. For a time, he understood the business of comedy better than almost anyone around Charlie. How strange is it that the man who helped build one of cinema's greatest fortunes could not fully protect his own? His screen career collapsed after legal scandal in Britain in 1929 connected to actress Molly Wright and British International Pictures. After leaving England, he faced unpaid tax demands, and by 1930 he was declared bankrupt. Sidney spent much of his later life in Europe and died in Nice in 1965. Charlie Drake. Probate records turned Charlie Drake's long career into one painful figure, about 5,000 pounds left behind. For a man who had once been one of Britain's most popular comic performers, the number felt brutally small. Born Charles Edward Springall Drake built his name through television, film, theater records, and pantomime, becoming a major face of British comedy in the 1950s and 1960s. At his peak, he earned serious money. Later reports claimed he made millions across his career, but the fortune disappeared through gambling, racehorses, fast cars, yachts, unpaid tax, and an expensive lifestyle that fame could not keep feeding forever. Can you imagine making a country laugh for decades, then leaving behind less than many people earn in a few months? After suffering a stroke in 1995, Drake withdrew from performing and spent his later years at Brinsworth House, a home for retired entertainers. He died there in 2006, aged 81.